Hello everyone, and welcome to Model Walk Explained. Today's story is called One Goodbye, A Lifetime Apart. Our model will portray a young woman named Evelyn. Evelyn once believed that leaving Marcus was only a temporary sacrifice for both their sakes. 10 years later, while covering the demolition of an old apartment building in Taipei, she discovers a bundle of letters that were never delivered. It turns out that the words, "Don't wait for me," were not a betrayal, but part of a farewell, carefully arranged by someone else. Some truths simply arrive too late. They may clear away years of misunderstanding, but they cannot restore the life that has already been lost. That night, rain was falling over Taipei. Snow rarely falls during a Taipei winter, but the rain can be as fine as loose threads on an old jumper, impossible to pull free without unraveling everything. Evelyn was 32 when she saw Marcus's name again inside an old apartment building that was about to be demolished. She worked as a newspaper reporter and had been assigned to cover an urban redevelopment project. The owner was a quiet, elderly woman named Mrs. Shen. She spoke slowly, but her eyes were remarkably sharp. She led Evelyn up to the 4th floor and unlocked a room that had been sealed for 10 years. "Someone used to live here," Mrs. Shen said. "He left and never came back." Inside, there was only an iron bed, a leather suitcase, and a dead jasmine plant on the windowsill. Evelyn crouched down and began sorting through the scattered papers. At the bottom of the suitcase, her fingers touched a bundle of letters. Her name was written on every envelope. The handwriting belonged to Marcus. She sat down on the dusty floor. For a moment, it felt as though the entire building had fallen silent. Even the sound of the demolition machinery seemed to retreat into the distance. 12 years earlier, they had both been 20. Evelyn studied journalism. Marcus studied architecture. He was poor without being ashamed of it. He owned only 2 shirts and wore them on alternate days. Yet somehow, he always had enough money to buy her the most expensive strawberry cake from the bakery at the end of the lane. "A girl should eat something sweet while she's young," he once told her. "There will be plenty of bitterness later." She complained that he sounded like an old man. Secretly, she loved him for it. They came from different worlds. Evelyn's father owned a property development company, and her family ate with silver cutlery. Marcus lived with his mother in a rented flat. Whenever the rain was heavy, they had to place 3 plastic basins around the sitting room to catch the water leaking through the ceiling. Evelyn did not care. Young people always imagine that love is made of petrol. Once it catches fire, they believe it can burn through any wall. In the year they graduated, Marcus was offered a position at an architectural practice in London. He told Evelyn he would be gone for only 2 years. "When I come back," he said, "I'll marry you." On the evening before his departure, they walked beside the Thamesui River for hours. The wind blew Evelyn's hair across her face. Marcus reached out and gently brushed it back into place. There was something in the tenderness of that gesture that already felt like a farewell. The following day, Evelyn waited at the airport for 3 hours. Marcus never appeared. She received only one message: "Don't wait for me. There is someone else." The sentence was short and clean, like a knife washed so thoroughly that not even the blood remained. She rang him, but his phone was switched off. She went to his flat, but everything had already been removed. Later, someone told her they had seen Marcus boarding a flight with another woman. Evelyn did not cry. When she returned home, she took the grey coat he had given her and cut it into pieces. 2 years later, she married a man chosen by her father. Her husband was respectable, quiet, and considerate. He never asked why she sometimes called another man's name in her sleep. Their marriage lasted 7 years. It was like an elegantly furnished room, without a single window. When they divorced, Evelyn's mother accused her of being willful. Evelyn thought the truly willful thing had been believing in forever when she was 20. She opened the first letter. "Evelyn, your father came to see me. He said that if I did not leave, he would make sure my mother lost access to her treatment. He also said he would make you hate me for the rest of your life." I did not believe him at first. Then he showed me an application for an overseas study program with your signature on it. It seemed that you were preparing to leave as well, only you had never told me. Evelyn suddenly remembered the application. Her father had claimed that he was helping her apply for an exchange program. She had never signed it. The second letter explained that Marcus had arrived in London but his mother died only 3 months later. He had wanted to return to Taiwan to find Evelyn. Before he could do so, Mrs. Shen sent him a wedding invitation. The bride's name was Evelyn. There were 47 letters in total. Not one of them had ever been delivered. Evelyn asked Mrs. Shen why she had kept them. The elderly woman looked out of the window. A long time passed before she answered. "Your father paid me every month. He said young people's illnesses would cure themselves if they were left alone for long enough." "And Marcus?" "He came back once, 5 years ago. He knew you were divorced. He stood outside this building all night, but in the end, he never came upstairs." Evelyn held the letters so tightly that her fingertips turned pale. "Where is he now?" Mrs. Shen handed her the final letter. The envelope had not been sealed. It was dated 3 days earlier. "Evelyn, I am getting married. It is not because I no longer love you. It is because I have loved you for so long that I have finally understood how waiting can make a person selfish. There was a time when I wanted you to regret everything. Later, I only wanted you to have a good life. This is my final letter." The wedding was taking place in Kaohsiung the following afternoon. Evelyn boarded the earliest high-speed train south. Throughout the journey, she imagined what she would say when she saw him. She would tell him that her father had deceived them both. She would tell him that she had not been happy either. She would tell him that if he turned back now, perhaps everything could still begin again. But life is not a newspaper. A mistake cannot always be corrected in the next edition. By the time she reached the church, the guests had already left. White flowers lay scattered across the wet ground, beaten down by the rain, like snow that had arrived many years too late. Marcus was standing outside, seeing off the final guests. He looked older, but his eyes were still gentle. When he saw Evelyn, he did not seem surprised. "You finally received the letters," he said quietly. Evelyn looked at him. "Do you love her?" Marcus glanced towards the bride inside the church. He paused before answering. "She did not make me wait." The words were not cruel, they were simply precise. Evelyn smiled, but tears fell from her eyes. Marcus opened his umbrella and held it over her, just as he had once brushed the wind-blown hair away from her face 12 years earlier. "What if I had known sooner?" she asked. "Perhaps we would have stayed together. Perhaps we would still have separated." He looked out at the rain. "But at least you would not have needed to hate me all these years." He placed the umbrella in her hand and turned back towards the church. Evelyn remained where she was, watching the doors close slowly behind him. At last, she understood what it meant for one goodbye to last an entire lifetime. It did not mean that two people would never meet again. It meant that by the time they did, they had already become different people. After returning to Taipei, Evelyn burnt all 47 letters. The flames were small, casting a faint light across her peaceful face. Some love stories remain with us, not because they are meant to begin again, but because they allow us to understand that once in our lives, we were truly loved. Sometimes, that is enough. That brings our story to an end. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and switch on notifications so you never miss any of our latest uploads. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.